Chapter 38. The Devouring Shadows. Leothran. Caleb shouted back at her. She pulled one of her swords from a Gruul's back and turned. Following his surprised gaze into the distance from where the enemy had advanced, she saw the dark shapes charging toward them, and in the dark he saw the yellow of her one eye widen. "The Satyr come," she shouted over the uproar. Men and Gruuls were running back the way they came, rallying together with the coming beasts. "How many?" Caleb called. "I count at least 20, she continued. "Show no mercy. They will tear you asunder. And Caleb, I see other riders afar off. I believe our General Palson is now on the field." "He is coming for you," said Caleb as he chopped into another Gruul. "Stay close or this will be the end of us." They kept moving through the sea of battle, and by this time most of the Phaldicians were also pointing and hollering in despair. Plenty of their cavalry were still wreaking havoc among the Talgathians, and upon taking notice of the impending threat, the Phaldician soldiers began to rally together as best they could. There was hardly enough time to regroup sufficiently before they charged head-on. The beasts dived into the mass, and with mighty roars began to rip apart anyone that was there to meet them. Caleb saw one of them in the moonlight not more than 20 paces off, a great wildcat with a thick mane of fur around its neck and enormous curled goat-like horns protruding from the sides of its head. It had large empty eyes that glowed the radiant yellow hue of the Satyr, and even on all fours the creature stood well above Caleb's height. As it charged through the battlefield, its great jaws engulfed the entire top portions of men, and its powerful clawed arms, thick as tree trunks, swiped a huddle of warriors into the air never to breathe again. He immediately understood the great disadvantage they faced, and was wondering how to go about attacking such a creature when Leothran sped ahead of him. "Follow me and do as I do," she shouted to him. "There I see much. Our only hope is to strike from behind." He obeyed, and was more grateful than ever that he now carried his broadsword rather than his smaller dueling blade that would have stood no chance against these beasts. He dragged it down near his side as he ran, trailing it behind him to retain as much arm strength as possible. As they approached the Satyr beast, shrieks of dying men ripped through the air. Men surrounding the creature scurried about with fear in their eyes, frantically trying to either find an opening to strike, or to move clear of the destruction. Leothran moved toward its hind legs, which kicked up and down as it pounced on new prey. They both stood clear with their weapons at the ready, and fended off a few other men as they waited for the opportunity to attack. Caleb's eyes were busy. Available targets on the beast revealed themselves every second, but it was moving too quickly to get in and out safely. One false step would end his life with either a kick from a back leg or worse, being crushed under its weight. Even as he analyzed, Leothran moved in with the speed of a viper lunging for the kill. She dropped low, avoiding a punt from its leg, and as it landed hard against the ground, ran her sword across one of its tendons, winning a ground-shaking roar of pain. The great cat spun with speed that seemed impossible for a creature its size and weight. It raked out to smother Leothran, but by the time its giant paw reached the spot where she crouched, she was no longer there. Its maw opened wide and belted another roar as more swords and spears dug into it from all angles. Falling and rolling onto its side, it claimed another victim by crushing an unfortunate soldier who stood waiting to attack. Caleb jumped clear as its limbs tore the air in a fury to repel any other attacks. Before anybody near could land the final blow, it regained its footing, although the back leg Leothran had cut was hanging limp and twitching. Caleb circled it from a safe distance and waited until it turned its back again. Without thinking, he took the window of opportunity and dashed forward. He dived and rolled underneath its girth, and as he passed through its stomping legs, jabbed his sword straight up into its belly. His plan was to cut as much as he could and roll out the other side, free of harm's way again, but he was taken by surprise when the beast's whole weight immediately collapsed from the shock of the attack. The sword ran deeper into its body as it fell, and if it had not been for the sword's wide handguard, every bone in Caleb's body would have been broken to shards. He dug the handle into the ground beside him, creating a narrow but safe escape from death. He felt the weight slam onto his legs and chest, but the beast was up again in an instant, and he scurried out as quickly as he could and dove away, where he met Leothran pulling him to his feet. He looked back to see the creature struggling now as it rolled on the ground, dying with his sword protruding out of its belly. Countless other swords and halberds drove into it repeatedly, as the crowds of Valdetians rushed in to claim the victory. As the creature died, Caleb heard the horns from near the city wall sounding. What was left of their cavalry he could see making a mad dash to the bridge, while groups of other satyr beasts chased them down. The horns blasted loud and clear in his ears, and all around him men ran back toward the city. Retreat. Caleb nodded in agreement. The field was taken. They had to fall back. Can you run? Leothran asked. We must make for the bridge. Caleb's head was spinning. He had evaded death under the wildcat, but its crushing weight had dealt some damage. He could feel pains in his chest and ankles and guessed he had twisted something as well as cracked a rib or two, and it hurt to breathe deeply. I can run, he responded as he dropped to his knees and pushed over a dead Valdetian. He pulled a broad two-headed axe free from the corpse's hand and stood again. Let's move. The two of them sprinted through the night toward the glow of the City of Fire. He knew atop its walls Anselm, Alastra, and 100 other wardens stood waiting with their hexes, but that was only if the bridge was taken. Not even the bridge will hold for long with these creatures fighting with them. It took 30 men to bring just one down, and it nearly claimed me. If only Leothran could change. He shook his head as he ran, panting and sweating from the pain. No. That would be the end of her. The wardens would call down hell upon her, as well as the Valdetians. No, it is too dangerous. If only there was a way. Retreating was always extremely dangerous. The enemy's spirits would be boosted by the morale of gaining the upper hand, and had the advantage of striking from behind as they fled. Caleb and Leothran ran single file, one looking ahead and the other behind, and they adjusted their flight as necessary to avoid the greater dangers as they made for the bridge. Caleb repelled a sword thrust from a man charging him from the side, and sank his axe into the attacker's belly. By the time he was finished, Leothran had run completely around him in a defensive circle, ending the lives of the 3 others who had also closed in to take him. After making a wide arc off to the east of the field, the 2 of them finally reached the bridge, which was miraculously still being defended by a thick line of Valdetians at its face. The satyr beasts had pulled back somewhat, and the charge of the enemy was slowed by the storm of flaming arrows that rained down from the towers on the sides of the bridge. All of Talgoth's forces that attempted to continue their charge across the river were met with large stones and clouds of razor-sharp metal shards pouring onto their heads from above. Caleb could not believe their luck, as he saw the Talgothians fall back 100 spans into the field to regroup. They would be back in full charge very soon, he knew that, but this small pause in combat was critical and could be their last chance of survival. They ran with the current of retreating soldiers behind the line of defense to temporary safety on the bridge. Everyone he could see looked exhausted and frightened to death, a look he had seen many times over and on many different faces, but tonight he was no exception. As soon as they were clear of danger, Leothran helped him to the ground where he could lay and rest against the wall of the bridge. He panted and focused on regulating his breathing. Leothran wiped the blood on her swords clean with her sleeve and returned them to their sheaths. Caleb wondered how swords so light could have survived such a heavy assault. Only perfect cuts could have preserved them. Now that they were bathed in the light of the torches running along the sides of the bridge, he could see details of her for the first time since the battle started. She bore cuts and gashes all over, and he could see her arm had been pierced. Half of her face was covered in blood, but he could not tell whether or not it was her own. She looked down at him with a concerned look. "Do not worry, I will be all right," he reassured her. Now would be a great time to have Ansel and Ella here with one of their healing hexes. "I thought you had been crushed," she said. "I am relieved you yet live, although I fear once they return we may not be so lucky again." "I agree," Caleb said with now more comfortable wheezes. He massaged his injured ankle and grimaced at the pain. "We will not be able to hold the bridge. But if they get through to the wall, the wardens might be able to do something." Leothran started to wave to a warden who was running from person to person healing wounds as quickly as he could, but Caleb stopped her. "I will be all right," he said, getting to his feet. "Let them tend to those who need it." Just then a horse stopped short nearby. A rider heavily armored jumped down and removed his helmet to reveal Olam's battle-worn visage. Fate cursed their trickery to the pits. Olam spat. His usual warm smile was nowhere to be found, and his long hair was soaked in sweat and hung twisted behind his head. We could have taken the field if not for those animals. 25 they had altogether. Only 12 we slew before we had to clear the field. We were losing too many horsemen. They fight like they have no souls, I tell you. It is not far from the truth, Leothran said to him. These are renegades among my people and patrons of Talgarth. They value killing and blood even over their own lives. Well, I am glad to see that you two have survived, Olam said, with a hearty slap to their shoulders. Caleb grunted and coughed. Here we will make our last stand before they reach the city wall. The bridge will be taken, he said. It is only a matter of decreasing their numbers before we leave our lives to the wardens. We shall see if these creatures can withstand the assault of the Hexer's elements in their skins. He returned to his horse and climbed into the saddle again. I need all of my officers here. Not a single one of us can be spared elsewhere. Milady, he said to Leothran, you must go to the wall for me and find your friends Sir Anselm and Sage Alastra. Tell them of our situation and ask them to prepare to destroy the wildcats once they break through our lines. Leothran nodded and looked at Caleb. Be careful, he said to her. They will need you up there when the fight presses forward. Good luck, Caleb Ra. Embrant, she said with a small bow, recognizing this could be the last time they meet. It has been an honor. And good luck to you, Caleb replied. By dawn this will all be over. Leothran turned and began jogging toward the city wall, weaving in and out of the soldiers until she disappeared. Caleb looked back up to Olam, who was working with the strap of his helmet under his chin. You and your friends have been invaluable to us. I thank you, he said. Come, Sir Rembrandt. The enemy draws near. Let us finish this. He slammed the visor of his helmet closed and turned his steed around to head back to the front of the bridge, and Caleb stretched and followed. He left the axe he had picked up leaning against the wall along with several of the more damaged pieces of his armor, taking some of the stress off of his wounds. He would not be as protected, but if he wanted to survive, he knew he needed the extra mobility. He chose a path through the crowd of battle-worn soldiers and searched for an available blade and a mouthful of water. Since sunset, Anselm and Alastra had been watching the events of the battle from atop the wall with concern. They had high hopes during the clash of the first wave of infantry, but when the Talgathian Sartir were set loose, all of them readied themselves for the worst. The torches had been lit all along the wall, and 100 wardens lined the expanse watching and waiting for the word to blast destruction down to the ground below. Anselm swallowed hard and sniffed, frowning at the lump that had been forming in his throat for the past few hours. He was cold and uncomfortable, especially wearing the heavy breastplate and sword over his robes. Alastra stood next to him, and was equally frustrated, only with the waiting and anticipation of battle rather than the armor and sword she bore. It had been over an hour since the battle began below, and now that it approached, he swore his sister looked almost relieved to have something to do, even if it was engaging in battle. If they know anything down there, Alastra was saying, they will just let the enemy through so we can do our worst. The bridge doesn't stand a chance against those monsters. Anselm agreed. By simply foregoing defense of the bridge and clearing out of the way, they could use stronger hexes, but it was a gamble to allow the enemy to just walk to their front door. Second-degree hexes should be all we need to stop those things, Anselm replied dryly. We may yet give them a fighting chance down there. They both searched the crowd 50 paces below, despite the fact that it was impossible to pick out any details. They were both looking for their friends, Anselm seeking out Leothran and his sister watching for Caleb. Not a half an hour passed by, before they saw the enemy advance again with the wildcats charging at the head. Look, Alastra said. It has begun again. They both watched as chaos reigned again below them. It was easy to see from the wall that the Talgarth troops still outnumbered that of Faldish's, and the ground around the wildcats piled higher and higher with bodies. They could see the attempts of the enemy on the far side of the bridge to cross the river. Several succeeded in avoiding the projectiles from the towers above by diving beneath the water, emerging again on the other side to try and climb their way up the spiked barricades that lined the bank. Very few got through to the wall, and the wardens ignored them to save their energy for when the line was broken. They were watching the battle ensue with grim expressions on their faces when a hand rested on Anselm's shoulder. He turned and blinked at the yellow glow of Leothran's eye. "Leo, you're all right." He sporadically hugged her, until he realized how odd it was. She smiled and greeted Elastra also with a pat on the arm. "I bring word from General Olam," she said with duty heavy in her voice. "The bridge will be taken soon, he says. He wishes you to make ready here. I will stay and help where I can in case they breach the wall." "That sound advice?" Anselm said sarcastically. "And from the looks of things, that should not be too much longer. We will need an expert swordsman such as you if they reach us here. Wardens are not known for their skills with weaponry after all." "Have you seen Caleb?" Elastra asked. "I was with him," she nodded. "We managed to slay one of the Sartir. It nearly claimed his life, but he fights on. He is as well as can be expected." Elastra nodded, and looked back down at the bout on the bridge with more concern than before. "He will be all right, I assure you," Leothran said. "I see now why he has attained the rank of captain in Tritus." Anselm breathed easier now that Leothran was unexpectedly by his side, but he watched on now with concern for his closest friend. "Stay alive, Caleb." The battle turned grave as they watched the number of Valdetians lessen with each passing minute. He saw perhaps 4 or 5 of the beasts below meet their end, but for each one dozens of horsemen and footmen went down with them. At long last they watched as the line of defenders disappeared, and a current of the invader forces poured over the bridge onto the grassy area before the wall, carrying hooked ropes and ladders with them. Elastra rubbed the scars in her palms and called down the line for them to ready their strongest hexes.
Thank you for listening. Subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss the next chapter. Episodes go live every Monday and Friday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. The audiobook can be purchased in its entirety on Google Play Books. Get the whole trilogy now in both paperback and ebook formats. All links are in the description.